email is typically the least user-intrusive migration. As I mentioned earlier on, Outlook will still connect to an Exchange mailbox, whether it's on 365 or an Exchange on-prem, and that sort of same approach always works. From a usability point of view, everyone is familiar with Outlook in most cases. Obviously, there's the variant between the different versions, but it's still Outlook, if that makes sense. And then depending on the migration type, you have a slightly different user experience about how the migration goes from a user point of view. If you've gone down the hybrid approach, you're able to move your mailboxes in batches, even one at a time. During working hours, they'll replicate between Exchange on-prem to Exchange online. And then when the mailbox is ready to be completed, you can either have that automated or just manually approve that yourself as an administrator. And that's when the user will then get prompted to restart Outlook. Once they restart Outlook, they're in the same profile, it comes back up again, they connect to 365, and off they go. So you can do that gradually in batches that suit your rollout strategy. The big bang approach, again, you can do that by the hybrid, depending on the size of the organization, it can be done that way. There are also migration tool sets that can be used that will just create a brand new mailbox in 365 without building a hybrid and replicate the data from the source to the target. And then you just do a reconnection on your cutover day with a brand new Outlook profile. With either approach, the key thing is around planning. Again, to make sure you're covering everything in your messaging environment, to make sure you're not going to leave anything uncovered. So things like centralized signatures. If you're using something like an Exclaimer style product, which has got HTML signatures that are stamped onto emails, making sure you're using the right version that works with 365. From an archiving point of view, a lot of organizations will be using PSTs, which is always a delightful thing to deal with. Or you may be using other third-party archiving solutions such as sort of Enterprise Vault. Are you going to be maintaining those solutions? Are you going to be looking at leveraging the native features in 365? So having to ingest back that data to reduce third-party licensing costs, for example. The other key aspect around an email migration is mailflow. So how are you going to be doing the message hygiene? So whether you're using existing on-premise appliances sitting in front of the Exchange server, or you're using a cloud service like Semantic Message Labs or Mimecast, or are you going to migrate to the pure native 365 offerings, Exchange Online Protection and 365 Defender, which was formerly Advanced Threat Protection? How you plan that cutover and what the impacts are for that as well. The other things that you really do have to consider are any applications that integrate on-prem. So whether you're using your scan to email functionality, how you're going to relay that back into the mailboxes. Do you have any third-party systems that need to use SMTP relay or sign specific mailboxes to send and receive emails based on what they're doing? So all those areas will impact how your Exchange hybrid or your Exchange migration will need to be planned and approached. How we've also been working over the last year or so, obviously has been dramatically changed due to COVID, but a lot of this stuff was starting to happen pre-COVID as well. End users are collaborating more and more, working in teams more often than in individual silos. Whether you're working at home with people in the same office or remote locations, whether that's time zones, locations, or partner organizations, everyone's starting to collaborate between organizations in some respects. And everyone has their own different way of working. So the way I set up my machine, how I work, how I collaborate with people is specific to me. And then someone else in my team will have a slightly different preference to how they work. So having the tool that lets you work in a way that works for you is also quite important. So within 365, you've obviously got a variety of tools. So everyone's probably familiar with the Office desktop suite, so Word, Excel, PowerPoint. You have the ability to use desktop apps in 365. You also have the web-based versions as well, which you can use to do quick edits, etc., or review documents. And they're getting more and more feature rich as the time progresses. Those web versions are also embedded into Teams. In the Teams, when you open a document within Teams, it can open it natively in the Teams app using those online versions as well. Data is stored in one of three locations effectively, either OneDrive for Business, SharePoint, or Teams. Both OneDrive and Teams, the file storage is effectively powered by SharePoint anyway, So you're getting the same feature sets around co-authoring, versioning, etc., and sharing links, all those other bits and pieces. So the things that you can do across all of those is you can work simultaneously on a file in real time. So when we build these decks, for example, you've got myself, you've got one of the guys in marketing, you've got Stephen, and we can all be editing our own slides in the same file at the same time and not having to email versions backwards and forwards to each other and then trying to work out what the latest version is to merge it all together. Again, you can share externally, assuming your policies allow that, and you can share internally, and you can also then control who can view and edit based on those sharing permissions that you set as an end user. So if I wanted to share a document, I can say you can only view it and you can't download it, for example, from my OneDrive. This is what a relatively old Microsoft slide now, but I think it sort of helps explain where the different tools fit in regards to when you use them. So your inner loop is when you're working with people regularly on a core project, so a team meeting, an event like this, or something like that, and you can build a team, you can show your content in there, you can use the features in Teams there to have all that contextual information. OneDrive is like your personal home folder, your My Documents, and it's stuff that you can control access to at all times. We're not really touching on Yammer here, but Yammer is your outer loop, so where you can post information that people can then dive into when it's of interest to them, and they can view that at a time that suits them. Email, never going to go away, I don't think, no matter how many times people try to kill it. It's for your targeted communications, more specific, and sometimes a little bit more formal, if that makes sense as well. And then SharePoint is almost like your shared drive or your intranet, if that makes sense, and you can then use that to have, say, your static information, your policies, your procedures, etc. as well. Teams is rapidly becoming the single pane of glass for accessing 365. Many applications now can be surfaced through Teams, whether that's pinned via a tab, installed as an application via Teams. If anyone's seen Microsoft Viva that's been recently announced, most of that's exposed via apps that are published via Teams, for example. And you can obviously integrate third-party apps outside of the Microsoft ecosystem into that as well. They're able to share content within Teams, whether that's a chat, a meeting, or a call. You can post files, documents, videos. It just becomes your hub for teamwork, to coin the Microsoft phrase, for lack of a better word. But then the question is, where do you migrate your data to? So you can create a departmental team, you can create a departmental SharePoint site, and how you want to access those environments, it comes down to which way you want to go. The migration, to an extent, is still the same, because you've got to synchronize that data from the on-prem file stores into that SharePoint site or that team site, which is effectively a SharePoint file library anyway. And then those key considerations are still the same in regards to that: is how much data do you have, how much that data is actively used and regularly used. So do you want to migrate data that hasn't been accessed in over 2 years into this environment, or would you rather move that into some archive storage somewhere else? Do your file names and paths work in regards to moving them to 365? Like with the file shares on-prem, there's rules around characters, file lengths, paths, etc., that can or cannot be supported. And that, by doing an assessment of that before you even try to migrate, it means you're going to have a smoother migration and less errors and to deal with on go live. And how is that data structured? Is the structure in a good enough state for you to just want to lift and shift it as it is into SharePoint, Teams, etc.? Are your permission models accurate, or do you want to try and simplify and restructure that to make it a much more efficient experience from an end user point of view? Just going to briefly touch on some of the voice capabilities as well. Obviously, Teams is a collaboration tool, but it can also provide full-blown telephony solutions. So key to my migration to Teams Voice is understanding your existing commitments to your existing solution. So maintenance, agreements with partners. Are you tied into SIP ISDN connections with telecom providers? How are you using that telephony? Do you have a lot of individual numbers just coming into individual users? Do you have main numbers that then get routed to various parts of the business with hunt groups? How heavy are you on outbound calling? Is it thousands of minutes? Is it very, very sporadic? And do you call internationally? And And some of the reasons for that is obviously Microsoft provide calling plans, which you can bolt on. You have a true cloud service. That makes sense. And the other way of getting voice into Teams is by using what's called direct routing, and that is effectively bring your own SIP service. So whether you're going to use your existing SIP trunks on premise with appliances that sit, gateways that sit on prem in your environment that can route things into Teams, or you can partner with someone like Cloud Direct who have our own calling plan infrastructure, and we can integrate that into your tenant, which becomes another cloud only service, but you're not tied by the Microsoft license calling plan, if that makes sense. And then Teams itself, you've got the whole how do you route your calls into Teams. So Microsoft don't use the term hung groups in their voice platforms. If you're familiar with Skype, it was response groups. In Teams, it's a call queue. Does very much the same thing. Number hits that queue, it will ring the relevant people in that queue, and you've got a couple of different types of routing algorithms. Auto attendance, press 1 for this, press 2 for that, so you can control your call flow into and outside of your organization. You're able to set up business hours for in hours, out of hours. The same for for international holidays like Christmas, New Year, etc. Where you need to think about additional third-party integrations for Teams Voice is around compliant call recording and contact center, and in some cases reporting. There's obviously some inbuilt reporting depending on what you want to achieve. There are third-party analytics tools that you can deploy to analyze what's going on with Teams calling, but also not just that, you can understand the adoption of the platform as well.